making...
Hold on, before we pivot,
Yeah.
I think we need to just lean into that for a second. Christina Choe is one of the great directors working in the world, and I'm very, very proud right now that she's here moderating this Q&A. So thank you.
Oh. Well, I'm honored to do this also, and just, we had such a close working relationship.
I'm very lucky that I got to learn from her. I would not be here today if I hadn't had that experience.
As I did from you, I think every part of the collaboration, especially in editors, that's a huge, you're also a filmmaker in my mind. So, and then you became, you made two other films before this.
Is it like it must be like, I don't know, like being a mom and I'm like the kid and you're like, yes, you're an adult. I see you as an adult, but you're still kind of my kid.
No, no. But no, I'm equally honored and proud to moderate and talk about your film, and super exciting, and want to congratulate you on making this film, particularly, as I said, like, it's a miracle to make any film, but especially during wartime must be a challenge that I can't really imagine what you went through, and want to talk about the process, but also just, it's such a beautifully done, powerful film that really gets into, both the horror and the beauty of trying to make art during the time of war. So why don't we get into the beginning of the origin story of how did you decide to make this film? Why did you decide to make this film?
Sure. Which one first, how or why?
How? I mean, why? Let's start with why.
Okay. Are there any Ukrainians here? All right. Slava Ukraine. All right. So, where do I start? I think, my family is from the former Soviet Union, as you know, and they came here before the Soviet Union fell. So they came, I think, with a lot of really confused, fractured relationship to their origins. 2 days before the start of the full-scale war, Putin gave a speech on Russian television, state television, laying out his justification for the war, saying that Ukraine doesn't exist, the culture doesn't exist, the history doesn't exist, that it's one spiritual space. There's a funny Ukrainian historian who said, if we're all one, are we Russians? Are we all Russians, or are we all Ukrainians? Which does Putin mean? So imagine what the Soviet Union told the republics like Ukraine about who they are and what they are. So I think, this question of language, so I inherited this very Soviet Ukrainian understanding of my own identity from my parents. And when this war started, I think it awoke in so many Ukrainians globally. It's like if Ukrainians all over the world were like this kind of quiet hornet's nest when this war broke out, this full-scale war. It's like this hornet's nest was shaken, and all these Ukrainians all over the world are like, no, wait, no, I'm here. I am not who he says we are. And yeah, I was, I think, one of those people. And I think I was really, like most people, inspired. All the experts said that Ukraine was supposed to fall in 3 days. Intelligence communities, media, this was all pretty conventional wisdom, that it was just going to end in 3 days, Kiev would fall, that Zelensky would flee. And neither of those things happened. 2 days into the war, the about a mile or 2 miles from where Zelensky was hiding with his wife, he could hear the missile fire. There were saboteurs circling all over Kiev looking for him to kill him. And Russian misinformation had circulated that he had fled. And so he's a former actor and comedian. And his first act of defiance was to make a film. He went outside in Kiev, specifically so that everyone could see that he's in Kiev, and he turned the camera on himself, selfie video. It's the film, the shot, single shot, one shot, heard around the world. And he pointed at himself and his few key cabinet members. He said, "President Tut, I'm here." And that short film inspired me. I watched that film like a lot of people, and it sent chills down my spine. And I had a cinematographer who I collaborated with before, and she called me. She was like, "So what are we going to do?"
So can I ask how many days or weeks after the very beginning of the war did this happen? Did this like call to action in you activate?
This was a couple of weeks, a week or two into it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So you called this DP.
She called me. I was already kind of thinking about what am I going to do, and then because I didn't think, my DP is from Thailand, so I was like, I didn't think I was going to take her with me to Ukraine, but she called me. She's like, "Let's go. What are we going to do? We got to go. We got to make something."
And had you been to Ukraine before, or was it?
But her visa situation wasn't going to work, so that's why. But yeah.
Gotcha.
But
had you been to Ukraine? You've never been to Ukraine before?
No,
this
I had
time?
not. I had not.
Okay.
So then the how, I reached out to a cinematographer who I admired, a Ukrainian cinematographer who shot a movie called Maidan by Sergei Loznitsa from 2014. That's a very controversial figure right now, but in Ukraine. But the DP, Stefan, I found his number on Signal. I think it was on his IMDb Pro. And I texted him and I said, "Hey, are you safe? I'm a fan of yours. I'm coming to Ukraine.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
Okay, so you just texted him out of the blue and said, "I'm coming to Ukraine."
Yeah.
Okay, and then?
We thought about whether we should get on the same page about what we're going to talk about, and we decided we're not going to do that, and we're just going to have this conversation.
No, I think we should have, this is a conversation. I'm finding out a lot of this at the same time, so I'm curious.
So yeah, and he wrote me back. He said, "I'm safe. Yeah, let's talk." So we started talking every night.
Wow.
We'd be on the phone together at night, and he'd smuggle himself a little bit of vodka because at the time you couldn't get any. And he said, "I'm out on my balcony drinking. Can you hear that?" And picked the phone up. He said, "Those are the sirens."
Wow.
And then he connected me with a fixer who was also a producer of a film that I had loved and admired, called a Ukrainian film called Stop Zemlya, which won Crystal Bear in Berlin in 2021. He said, "This is my producing partner, but she's also a fixer. She'd been a fixer for the Washington Post and Associated Press and Wall Street Journal. So she was on the front line, taking them to the front lines, journalists." So I called her. Actually, he said she''ll look at some of your work, and if she approves, then she'll get on the phone with you.
And then how soon after that did you actually and could you just fly in? How did you get in?
So we started talking, Ola and I, this producer, and we started talking every day. And this was very early days of the war, so there were things you had to bring with you. You had to bring a flak jacket, level 4 body armor. You had to bring
What's a level 4 body armor? For those of us
It's
that don't know.
level 3 is like if you get shot with a handgun, that could stop it. Level 4 is more like war, like machine gun fire.
Wow. Okay.
So she was, telling me the things I need to bring, and so it took me some time to try and arrange to get those things. I don't know how much you want me to tell you about that, but turns out you can't bring level 4 body armor on a commercial flight out of the U.S. It's considered a military object, so I couldn't get one here. So I found a website where I had it delivered to Warsaw, and I just so happened, we just talked about this, I just so happened to have a Polish nanny from when I was a kid who I have kept in touch with. She was like a second mom, Hanna, who lived not far from Poland. So I got on a one-way flight to Warsaw, thinking I was going to make a film about refugees, because my parents were refugees. My parents, my sister were refugees, Ukrainian refugees of a prior refugee generation. And so that's where my first thought went, that I was going to make a film about Ukrainians who left, like my family. So going to Warsaw made sense. I could have the flak jacket sent to Hannah's place, and interview refugees while I'm there, try and find a story. So I went to Warsaw, and I started interviewing refugees, and I read an article in the Washington Post on April 17th about Liana and the center, and about her partner Stepan. And I thought that was something that I started looking at different things that Liana had said on the internet, and there was something she had said that caught my attention. I found her on Telegram. I reached out to her. I got on the phone with her, and that night told my producer, I'm like, we have something here. And she was like, yeah, this resonates with me as well. And she put me on a bus. So my fixer, Olha, who produced Stop Simla, became my producer. And she put me on a bus and put Vova, the DP, on a train from Kiev to Lviv. And the next morning, I was in Ukraine, where...
Wow. Okay, so what month is
this? Was April of 2022.
So how much time has passed since the very first day of the war?
It was just a little under 2 months after the start of the full-scale war.
Well, one thing that I felt was very striking, like as soon as I watched the film, was like this sort of weird, eerie feeling of like normalized life during warfare, and sort of had all these questions like at what point in the war is this that you're filming? Like how much danger are your main characters in while you're filming? And they're kind of going about their business, and that was really striking to me in the beginning. And how much danger were you in as far as going in at that point?
Yeah. I left out the punchline, which is that the flak jacket never came.
Blame Amazon, maybe.
But yeah. So it it was very early days, but the state of the war was different in different cities. But one thing that was uniform throughout Ukraine was this very complicated relationship to the sirens. Because when there's a missile flying in the sky in Ukraine, and they can see that there's something in the air, they don't know exactly where it's going to land, which city, which town. So all of Ukraine gets these alarms. So you never know. Just because there's an alarm going off doesn't mean you're necessarily going to get hit, but you might. So from very early on, I was in a shelter within the first hour of my getting there, but not everybody went. within 2 months, people are developing the relationship to the sirens is evolving. For some people, it's like, fuck it. I'm not going to get up and go. I'm not going to hide for these, And some people are running in the street to hide. Some people aren't moving. We were in a bar and the alarm went off. Some people were like, I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying here and I'm drinking my beer. Some people left. So, the day that I got to Lviv, which was considered a relatively safer city because it's in the west, the morning before, the railway center was bombed. An entire shop was bombed, and 7 people died. Recently, it's been getting more frequently hit by drones, but the front lines were were in the east, and so.
And how long, did you have a plan of like how long you're going to stay, or how long did you end up staying?
I didn't. I knew I needed to get home relatively soon. My daughter was born 2 weeks after I got back from Ukraine, so I had a deadline.
Mm-hmm.
But I was all in all, I was there for a month.
And how, curious, like as far as a little bit logistically, like how did you continue directing this film from New York? And how much of the story did you kind of know or plan for, and characters that you knew you wanted to follow?
Well, the directing stopped when I left. To be honest with you, I didn't know what I had or if I had anything at all. And I think maybe this is something you can identify with as a director. Like, when are any filmmakers in here in the room? Yeah, hi. When you're done with a shoot, you have a little bit of PTSD. A shoot is a little bit traumatic, and you get back to life, and you're like, now I got to look at the footage, and I am dreading looking at this because what if I don't have... Can I ask
you, is most of the footage then that in the film from when you were there, or did you do any? Oh, yes. Okay.
So it's like that PTSD times a lot, because it's like, okay, there was coming home and dealing with having been in Ukraine, but then also the thought of not having a film, not knowing what you have. I couldn't look at the footage. I didn't watch it for 3 months.
Yeah.
Because we all risked our lives to make this film, and the thought of not having a film was just too much to bear. And I tried to find an editor. I tried to find a Ukrainian. I couldn't find a Ukrainian editor, and then eventually it was like, all right, maybe if they know Russian, maybe we can. But
you ended up...
I ended up editing it myself because I couldn't find someone to do it. Yeah. But I avoided it like the plague. I really tried to outsource it, and then so then once I started editing 3 months after I got back, then I also had a daughter, and so I had to sort of put my energy there.
And how much of like this sort of the main crux of the film to me, which is really exploring like what is the role of the artist or of art during
what do you mean
war? Like how much of did you have like some basic thesis like going into making the film? Well, yeah. Of like, okay, this is what I want it to be generally about?
Yeah, I think I knew I was interested in artists, but I was also interested in specifically in the role of culture in this war. And this goes back to your first question about why. And, there's this historian that I've been slightly obsessed with and stalking a little bit. He's a Yale professor. His name is Tim Snyder. Anybody know Tim Snyder? Yeah, there we go. So he said something to the effect of, if Ukraine resisted on February 24th, 2022, then it must have existed before then. So why has it been so hard for us to see that existence and that selfhood and that nationality and that identity? And that became something that even if I wasn't conscious of it at the time, something I was very preoccupied with, this culture question, this identity question. So for me, I came there exploring, wanting to understand and get a little closer to my own roots and heritage, something that was a bit distorted within my family, because they had come from an imperial colonial setting that was constructed in such a way that these cultural identities were erased and repressed to maintain the glue of empire.
I mean,
So-
it's the fact that you didn't grow up speaking the language.
Right.
That was really interesting, and I'm curious as to at what point did you decide that your background, your story, is part of the overall fabric of the film?
That was the very last thing to happen. So yeah, and again, I don't know. I mean, you know how it is when you're making a film. It's like these decisions, they're not always so rational. They're not always so like, oh yes, I'm going to do this because this. Especially with doc, you follow your nose. You're kind of in the moment. You're sort of chasing at the heels of time and chasing a story in a way like a journalist. But I think my nose went that way towards, the artists and this culture question and this information and cultural front line of this war, because it is a front line. Putin exploits misunderstandings about culture, about Ukrainian culture and identity, as very explicitly to justify war and genocide. And so why the artist? Because this helped clarify for me where I come from in a way that I could identify, because I spent most of my life trying to make art and film. So when I included myself in the story, yeah, that was something I really didn't want to do. And I knew from the very beginning that I wanted the artists making the film, filmmakers, the cinematographer, the sound person, the assistant editor, the producer. I knew from the very beginning that they were part of the ensemble of artists. But I didn't think I was going to be part of that.
Well, that's what is kind of ironic, because I thought that was a really beautiful thing to include your collaborators normally behind the scenes people, and that they are on the front lines of this war, and their experience is part of the story. And it feels like the role of the artists is a part of it is resistance, just to exist, or just to have. I mean, I was really kind of amazed that they were. It seems so like they didn't skip a beat, and they're just continuing to make their art, which, I just remember the beginning of the pandemic, like all of us that were creating things, like I was like, what do we do? What are we doing? What are we doing? And it felt like, I don't know, maybe we just didn't see that part of them questioning it, but it seemed like they had this like kind of driven purpose of like, we have to keep going, we have to keep existing.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think we've been on a lot of film sets, and there are other filmmakers in here who've been on a lot of film sets. I've never been on a film set with a crew where they were working in a country that was under attack with a the first thing I did when I got there, Misha and Volva picked me up. We went and we had a drink. Not a drink, coffee. We had coffee. It was daytime. And he told me he had just been in Bucha. And you heard his story. And that Misha had just had to evacuate his family and all this. Like, I've never worked with people on a film that were going through that. And this was a film about artists. So it just kind of immediately was like, yeah, this is your story too. So, but I showed the cut to one of my producers at one point, and she was like, David, this is fucked up. Sorry for cursing. She's like, all the artists in the film, all the film people involved in the film are telling their story, but you're not. The director isn't. That's weird. People are gonna have questions, So
I feel like that's, I don't know, in my experience, like you need someone outside of yourself to tell you, like, you are part of the story.
Yeah.
And we want to, you are part of, I mean, it's not just your collaborators, it's like you.
I was like, no, Stacy, no, don't make me do it.
Yeah, and one thing that I wanted to also get into is, so, we both went to film school together and sort of studied narrative fiction filmmaking and made those films.
You're really good at this. Is she not really good at this? Streamlining me? Because I could just go on. If you've noticed, I'm very good at digressing and just going off on some, look at the river and the light. And you're just like, David, come on. Let's read
So, what was I saying? Oh, okay. So
see, I did it.
We started making films under like narrative fiction genre, right? And I guess, like, were you daunted by the idea of making a documentary? Did you study other documentaries? How did you kind of dive in and sort of, because they are very different. The process is so different.
Yeah. Honestly, I mean, that's a good question. I didn't really think of them as different, and I didn't really treat them as different. I think that there are more similarities between the two than there are differences. A movie is a movie. I think the binary between doc and narrative is maybe a bit too strict, and
I mean, I think you can see that in the filmmaking, which I appreciated. Like it almost felt like in documentary you have the traditional B-roll, which is, I don't know, what does B-roll stand for? Like it's
blah blah blah. I don't know.
But it's the footage, like,
behind the scenes, I don't know,
of the landscape or the cities, it's, and I felt like the way you treated your, B-roll was almost like an art installation of like, there was some of the footage outside the train felt like very Tarkovsky-ish with like the fog, or like the B-roll in the subway felt very like, it's like a surreal dream. And there was, I did feel sort of this influence of narrative filmmaking in a way.
Well, I guess the way that I would put it, which maybe isn't as eloquent as the way the other filmmaker I'm going to quote put it, but I think for me, neither doc or narrative has a monopoly on truth, and the truth is probably somewhere in between. And there's this great, I was just in Rome, and brain fart.
Dad brain.
Jonathan Glazer was talking about his new film, and he said something that is going to sound like really, I mean, he's very English and he's very intelligent, but he's He's a total punk, in the best way. And he said that a film is invisible. It's a feeling. And the shots, the images in a film are there to achieve that feeling, right? Or the story. You can think of the story the same way. It's not the story for the sake of the story. The story is there to get you to a certain feeling. This idea of the film as being this something invisible, I don't know. I love that idea, because of what is a feeling. It doesn't have a physical form, and that it's all in service of that. And I think whether you're making a documentary or a narrative, both are in service of that, of a feeling, of a truth, and those things don't have a physical material form. So, yeah, whether it's a doc or a narrative, I think when we make those things and when we go to those things, we want similar things. I don't know. But maybe I shouldn't speak for everyone, because people want different things from different things, and that's okay too.
Well, I think that's a good note to end on, since we are supposed to wrap up. But this
Is
idea
there-
of what, truth shouldn't have
Yeah.
boundaries
Yeah.
or parameters, right?
Yeah. Is there any questions from the audience? Yeah? Okay. How am I changed? I've recently, really since the beginning of this, I had a lot of answers for that question. But I wonder if I was telling the truth. I think a truer answer is that I'm probably still processing that. I want to say that it's, makes me more, I don't know. Let's exchange info and talk in a year. Okay? Is that okay? Yeah.
The final scene with the girl taking her bike across the train track. How did you come upon that and decide that that was going to be the end of your film? And what does it mean to you?
It was one of the last decisions. Thanks for asking that. Yeah. And thank you for your question as well. It's just when you're in the edit, and I've spent too much time in the edit in my life. It's probably the thing I've done more than anything, which is sad because you spend most of it alone. But sometimes you just kind of perk up, and I think after the fact, the rationalization comes in, which is that maybe the image contains a contradiction and an ambivalence. There's both. It admits the horrors of the war and the realities of it, but it also speaks to the resilience that we live on, and that you got to just walk around it and go on, keep on living, and that it's a young girl felt hopeful to me.
Did you do it by chance? Did you film it by chance?
Oh, well, yeah, everything that's filmed in a documentary is kind of by chance. It's just kind of like, oh, wait, hold on, what's happening where? Okay, yeah, we'll go there, yeah, all right, yeah. You're really just flying by the seat of your pants. That the decision-making really kind of happens in the edit when you kind of try and make sense of them. And I think if there's any difference, which I don't want to overstate, because I think even in narrative, you write in the edit. They're two different languages. The language of a script is text, and the language of a film, there's no text. There's just pictures and sounds. Those are two different languages. And, it's like translating poetry. When you translate poetry from Arabic to Chinese, it's not one-to-one words. You have to find new poetry in Chinese. So even when you're cutting narrative, you're writing. But with Doc, there's no script at all. So you write it all in the edit. So that's why my first answer to you was that the decision to end there happened in the edit, because that's where it happens. Okay, thank you for coming. Thank you so much.